Hi, I'm Crystal, and we decided to do something a little bit different this time. We looked at our analytics and from you guys, and you have your favorite guests, and we have a few of our favorite guests and supporters. And today we're going to be talking with one of our favorite guests. So, as I said, I'm Crystal. Today I have on a beige shirt with brown flowers, and I have a brown background with a shelf, a clock.
And I'm Mark, also a co-host of Journeys, or the series we're doing now. And I'm a brown man with black glasses, black and white beard, green shirt, and behind me is a shelf with some knickknacks, and one of my ears appears to be higher than the other.
I'm Ann, and I'm wearing a royal blue shirt, and I'm sitting on a beige sofa. And behind the beige sofa is a 9-foot quilt made by my mother-in-law, with little bitty flowers and with squares and all sorts of things. It's dark blue and white mostly. And I am 66 years old, and I recently got a haircut, so that kind of helped because things were getting pretty stringy. I tend to be slow about getting my hair cut. I'm too busy with other things. So I am temporarily about as sensible looking as I get.
Yeah.
My hair.
Thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah. So, okay. Yep. Caucasian, brown eyes. Really weird eyebrows now. They're turning white, and so they're like part dark brown and part white, which makes me look a little bit like I'm from the Arctic, and I have snow crystals on my eyebrows. But my hair is pretty consistently brownish gray.
We really appreciate you doing this. It's exciting. Us starting this new series. Didn't expect it to be right now, but we appreciate you being the first one. That's exciting.
Well, I'm delighted to be with you all again. It's always fun talking with you, and it gives me a fresh perspective on my life. So y'all are quite a blessing.
Well, thank you. So are you.
Thank you.
And thanks, Anne, for being being our first guest here, and also being one of our first guests ever. And it's been a while since we've talked to you, so maybe you can give us an update on what's going on.
Absolutely.
With you in your life.
I talked with you all originally because I had developed Parkinson's disease and was taking rock steady boxing classes to combat my symptoms. And I believe at that point you were focusing on people who were involved in the martial arts as a way of helping them with their disability. And I kind of fit the bill that way. I had been taking rock steady boxing classes for a while. And 18 months after I started taking those classes, I became an instructor for rock steady boxing also. And I work with a head coach, Jessica Gentry, who does an amazing job of teaching boxing and telling really bad jokes. She has a whole set of dad jokes that she uses to make all of us groan at the end of each class. And she keeps things really fun and light and goofy, but she also works this really relentlessly hard, which is one reason why the people in her classes tend to thrive, because those of us with Parkinson's disease need to have exercise that pushes us a little bit beyond what is comfortable for us. That does the best job of combating our symptoms and also making new neural pathways in our brains. And my neural pathways, after 6 months of boxing, went through changes that reconnected my nose and my brain. So after 5 years of not being able to smell anything, partway through scooping a litter box, I was suddenly smelling things again. And I've had my sense of smell ever since. So yes, mixed blessing. So anyway, so I've been through some changes in the 6 years since I've been diagnosed. I went from being the least athletic human being on the face of the earth to being surprisingly athletic and enjoying it, and also being kind of trim for the first time. And then we had the COVID thing happen, and let's just say I'm a little less trim than I used to be, although I'm trying to work on the problem. And I have since developed some arthritis in my hands, so it's been a little trickier for me to hit a punching bag than it once was. But I'm also exploring some modifications and new ways of staying with the program, just by accepting the fact that, okay, my hands are not the way that they were before. And I've also added to my roster of activities a once-a-week class with my rock steady boxing friends on Parkinson's symptoms and what to do about them. And I research a certain aspect of Parkinson's, bring in handouts for everybody, share the information, and then let the students start to discuss it and inform each other, ask questions and all of that. And it's great fun because our boxers are amazing people with wonderfully varied backgrounds, and they're tough as nails, and they're curious, and they're willing to talk about things that are really hard to talk about anywhere else. So we have discussions that constitute things like constipation day or sexual dysfunction day, or I'm losing my ability to speak day. What do I do about it? You know, and we exchange information, and then things get better for people because they're facing down the tough things in life, not just avoiding them or getting discouraged.
Right. We just talked about that before this recording, about taking your, what you have going on that day and what your disability is giving you a hard time about that day or whatever, and adapting it to fit what you need to do that day. And that time of your life, So, and you've obviously been able to do that quite a bit, from the beginning of this. Having a progressive disability is not easy. You're constantly having to readapt what you can do, and of course that affects other aspects of your life as well. But you've certainly been able to accomplish that.
Well, thank you. It's been a gift having an opportunity to learn that skill, because I think it really has helped me in other areas of my life that have nothing to do with Parkinson's. Just as I'm getting older, some things become harder for me. But then I discovered that just by shifting my attention a little bit, I can see all sorts of new things that I can do that I wasn't able to do before. And it makes life fresh and fun, even in the midst of change. I think we get conditioned to expect that change really comes down to loss, and that it's kind of intrinsically tragic. And what I'm discovering is that change has its own blessings, and it's present in everybody's life, whether they have a disability or not. We're going to all go through changes, and if instead of focusing on the losses, we have an expectation that there are going to be new things opening up that were not possible for us before, then that keeps our lives from feeling tragic. But instead, that'll fill our lives with excitement and curiosity. Okay, what's coming next? That kind of thing.
Right.
It also
Or-
dashes away fear, you know? I think it's so easy when we don't know what's going on to just fill up with fear. And I think there's a reason why we are encouraged to let go of fear, because fear blinds us to the blessings that can be right in front of us. And if we're not scared, then we can see them for what they are.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, we were also just discussing the labyrinth stuff that and coming together with journeys, each other's journeys, and being able to adapt in that way to bring those journeys together and make life work.
Absolutely. And we can learn from each
Mhm.
other's journeys, even when we're in rather different places, and we can applaud
Mhm.
each other as
Mhm.
we are going through the changes and adapting and learning from them. And we don't have to judge ourselves as being in the wrong place simply because we're not in the same place as someone else. And we don't have to think of them as being in the wrong place just because they're not in the place where we are.
Right.
Wave to each
Mhm.
other and call encouragement to one another wherever we are and whatever direction we seem to be going in, because it's capable of being good.
So you mentioned there that you've had to learn how to adapt, or you've learned how to adapt a bit better. What would you say is there one thing that you can identify that you're most proud of the learning that has helped you adapt?
I think I've been especially blessed by learning that dignity is overrated. I remember teaching a rock steady boxing class and having an anxiety attack in the midst of it. And it kept me from being able to remember a couple of terms for things. And I just felt awkward and unprofessional and ashamed. And I went home that night and I just cried. And I thought, oh, my poor students, they deserve somebody better than I am ever going to be. I have panic attacks sometimes and feel so incompetent, and I should just quit. And then I thought, after a while, I calmed down and I thought, I could do that, but what would I be teaching them? That being imperfect means you have nothing to offer. But we're all imperfect and we all have something to offer. So let go of your pride and go in and use this as a teaching tool, a teachable moment for all of us. So I went in the next time and I said, Bill may not have noticed this, but I was a little bit overwhelmed last time and I had a panic attack. And they laughed and they agreed, yeah, I definitely had one of those. And I said, okay, it occurred to me, this is one of the symptoms of Parkinson's. We have problems with anxiety. So we probably have all had a moment of anxiety, maybe more than one in our lives. What can we do about it? And that started the most wonderful and grace-filled discussion about anxiety. And I remember one of my students saying that he had spent some years as a police officer in Baltimore. And on his first assignment, he was feeling tense about the upcoming situation. And he was questioning whether he would be able to do a good job of handling it. But as soon as he arrived and he was in the actual situation, not anticipating it, he instantly tuned into the people who were in need of help. And as soon as he started helping people who needed help, all the anxiety just flew right out of him. And I thought, my goodness, that's what happens with me. If I can stop thinking about myself and am I going to let everybody down, and instead focus on the need that I'm seeing in the people around me and how I can help them with that need or how I can reassure them, then I'm fine. So basically, this rather humiliating episode in my life may have opened people's minds and hearts to greater self-acceptance when they had their own version of it. And also because of this one person in my class bringing up his own experience, it may have opened all of us to some strategies for dealing with anxiety, which is look for someone you can help. It really helps, just get the perspective that we need, because it's when we just focus on ourselves that we're dealing with the anxiety.
Right. And helps to bring us more into the present, right? That what I heard there was that a lot of this anxiety was stemming about stuff that hasn't happened yet.
Yes.
And just your brain, it's your brain making up narratives and stories about what could happen.
Exactly. And some of the things it comes up with are pretty wild, but reality is seldom quite as bad as we think. Although I've had a couple of strings of incidents that were kind of disastrous, but even at the time, I realized that they were also hilariously funny, and so they have not been having the same kind of disastrous effects on me that they did when I was young and foolish and thought myself capable of dignity. So, now I'm undignified and I don't worry about it. And that frees me to see the humor in the disasters. Life's a lot more fun that way. I always have plenty of disasters to laugh about.
Yeah.
Apathy is another one.
Mm.
Another of the issues, because just about all of us have some area of apathy that we just have trouble summoning sufficient energy to handle. So that's another possible thrust.
Yeah. It's so interesting getting together with people with like disabilities or issues, that can help each other figure out ways to adapt
Exactly.
and figure out ways to make this kind of life easier.
Mm-hmm.
So that's an incredible dynamic to,
Yeah.
so we really appreciate people like you that have classes like that and can bring people together to help them do those things.
Well, I'm finding that even our students who think that they don't have anything in particular to give at this point in their lives, they themselves are discovering that they actually have enormous amounts to give. I remember one student said on his first day that he really didn't have a story to share. And now, after a couple of months, he's realizing that he is actually a very vivid and colorful person with a great deal to share. And I think he's remembering who he really is. He's not just a Parkinson's patient. he is a very three-dimensional person who also has Parkinson's. And he has
And I
to share.
I think it's incredibly important to once you at a place where you can internally figure out all the things that were not for you, or all the things that were keeping you from being the best person you could be. You know, once you do that, and then you are able to help other people, you know. So I think that's incredibly important, to also give them the space to have those realizations and be able to say, hey, this is who I really am. This is cool. Those things have not been noticed or have been discouraged, even, especially in the disability community, you know. Yeah, it's amazing how that comes to fruition, you know.
One of the things that makes me happiest about the work that I do is that I have a chance to hear people start to become audible again. Parkinson's wants to soften our voices, and a lot of us find ourselves in the position of having a lot to say, but not being heard by the people around us when we try to say it. So we do a lot of exercises to help strengthen the voice and the muscles that support the voice and all that. I remember reading a statistic that I found very alarming, which was that the suicide rate for people who have lost their voices is a good bit higher than for the general population. And it makes sense, because if you are still a person who cares deeply for and about things and you can't be heard, then people can't honor what matters most to you. And that leaves you feeling a lot of despair. So I feel strongly about the need to support the fight for our voices. We're doing a segment now of class that I call the Freedom Fighters segment. And it's when we are fighting for the freedom of our voices or our feet, because some of us have feet that get under the impression that they're glued to the floor. And we fight to free our fingers so that we have dexterity and we can feed ourselves and we can button our clothes and use zippers again and things like that. So we have this Freedom Fighters thing, which just reminds us that all of the parts of who we are worth fighting for. And when we do that, even if they are not the way that they once were, they are still able to serve us. And one of the great joys of my life is when I greet one of the students walking up to the door of Studio A in the building where I work. And I say, "Good morning, so-and-so, how are you doing today?" And I can hear the response. I feel like crying. I'm so relieved and so happy to hear the voice of that person. And I noticed that, I always say, "Oh my goodness, it's so wonderful to hear your beautiful voice." And then I see the sparkle in their eyes. And it's like, oh my goodness, they're remembering who they are and that they can express it. And people can hear and listen and honor them as human beings. What a cool thing is that?
Yeah.
And they can make bad jokes again. An important skill.
Yeah.
And it's funny because about 2 months after each student joins our class, I see a transformation. They go from being very nice, well-adjusted people to being snarky. They start to crack jokes, and they start to say things that are very clever and funny that they haven't been able to make heard for years, so they've maybe kind of given up on that. They can use sarcasm again.
Yeah.
And they kind of saunter, the swagger is back, which is really fun. We had one very well-behaved woman initially who, after 2 months, started being able to be heard when she was hitting the heavy bag. She was counting out the numbers of the punches, and I could hear her, and I said, "Good heavens, you sound like Howard Cosell." Now she's this tiny little beautiful woman. Kind of reminds me of a bird, because she has very delicate features and all of that. And here she's belting out 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and we could hear her. And the next thing I knew, I was looking over at her, and she was punching a heavy bag to the sound of Twisted Sisters singing, "We're not gonna take it." And she was punching to it, and she was singing at the top of her lungs. It was so beautiful. It was absolutely gorgeous. So, we have those moments like that are so precious, because you see somebody's true personality, and it's just marvelous. And there's power in that.
Yeah. To point brought up, that all that is lost when you're lost in your own anxiety or depression or whatever, and you choose not to show up.
Right.
People lose out on, like, number one, the individual loses out on their own personal growth. And then the other people with their disability lose out because they don't get to see what's possible if you just show up. And then 3, the non-disabled people around you don't get to benefit because their assumptions about people with disabilities are true. You didn't show up, and you're just not, you're not willing to fight for, your own dignity and fight for, out of love for your friends and all that stuff.
Right. And often that's a internalized generational situation. That's just what that we're taught, and how their mind formed to do that. And it's our responsibility to change those minds and show people who we are. We talked before, we were just talking about so we've talked in the past about, when the non-disabled community is just so focused on, when we become disabled, the therapies and the changes they have to make in their lives. They forget that we're a person, and we have a character underneath all that, and our own ambitions and our own dreams and hopes and stuff. And it kind of, I guess, becomes robotic in a way, what we have to do and what's accepted, and that's where the whole masking thing comes from,
right?
I think. And I think it's an important, like we're talking about, you having those classes and helping people remember who they are, and the kind of character they have, and making jokes and stuff like that you mentioned. I think that's incredibly important.
I think you're right. And just as an example, we have one person in our class who has spent his entire life serving others. And he has that so wrapped up in his identity that it's hard for him to let go of any of the ways that he always used to help others, even if they're kind of tricky now. So he is someone who, when there was like a 3-foot snowfall, he went out in the driveway to shovel and took his walker with him. And, that's just sort of an example of the way he is. He will just automatically start to help others. And it's been hard for him to let go of any of that, but it's also been very affirming for him to do that, because he's discovered parts of himself that are helping parts, but in ways that he hadn't been using before. Like, we have one person in our class who has some hearing issues, and this one person who is the automatic helper has kind of taken him under his wing. And now, if the second person is doing an exercise that has already ended, my helper student will call his attention to it and say, wait, we're starting a new exercise. And so he's still a helper. He's just an updated helper. He's helping in ways that are needed by the people who are right now in his life. And that's a beautiful thing to see, that we never stop being who we really are. We just may change the situation in which we are being who we are. And it's exciting to watch that happen. And it also has been fun having that person who is hard of hearing start to use his voice in ways that we can all hear, because he has a very dry sense of humor and is very smart and very, very delightful in terms of his way of thinking. And it's so much fun getting to know him for who he is. It really is. We have people in the class who are so much better at boxing than I will ever be. And it's fun being able to admire how athletic they are. Some of our people are wildly athletic. And it's also fun because we end up discussing topics in the class that I run called Parkinson's Good Life, which is all about how to have a good life when you have Parkinson's. It's entirely possible. And last time we had a Good Life class, we ended up talking about making sure we had people available to help us should something happen to our current care person. And we ended up discussing lots of different topics in the course of that. And I said, do we need to talk this over with a lawyer or something? And one of our students said, oh, I'm in the process of working with a lawyer on something. I'll ask him. And before I knew it, she had contacted him and he had agreed to come and talk with our class. And it's like,
Awesome.
whoa. Yeah, like if I just get out of the way, wonderful things happen.
Right.
It's
Right.
really fun.
Yeah. Just let him fit the people you need in your life.
Yeah.
And yeah, it all works out.
I can't do it all, but I also shouldn't, because this person who made those arrangements is wonderfully smart and competent, and she's a real go-getter. And it helps her remember that she's still that person. And she's wonderful. So they're a lot of fun. They're very inspiring. Everybody in our class has an interesting past and interesting stories that they have at various points been able to share with the class. And I feel like basically, here's this group of people I would not have known, because I would have found them intimidating, because they're good at all sorts of things that I can't imagine being good at. But instead, because of Parkinson's, we've had an excuse for being brought together. And now, here we are, this group of interesting, if slightly eccentric people. And we have so much fun just knowing each other. And there are people who walk by our studio and they ask about whether they can join our class. And the people at the front desk have to say, I'm so sorry, but you need to have a Parkinson's diagnosis in order to do this. And they feel sad, and we feel kind of enviable, which is not what I would have expected when I started with rock steady boxing, that would put me in the position of having something other people wish they could have, which is a really fun, really intense boxing class.
That really is the goal, or at least I feel in part it should be just for no one to notice that we have a disability, and I mean, obviously be cognizant of it and give us the help we need and support we need. But I mean, we should all just see each other as human beings and just, not worry about putting each other in boxes and making predeterminations of what people can do or can't do, or should have hang out with this person because they're disabled and they're not on the same level as me, and all that internalized junk.
Yeah.
Thing is, I'm friends with several people who I guess are technically disabled, but I don't think of them as being disabled. I see them as being people who have a fascinating take on life that is different from mine because their experiences have been different. And so, it's like people talk about how if you have a construction site with a fence around it and peepholes in various places, depending on where you're looking through a peephole, you'll see the construction site differently.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so, I've got a couple friends with CP, and they have a peephole that I wouldn't look through otherwise. But,
perception is totally different.
Yes. And it's very interesting. And I'm learning things from them and through them that I couldn't learn otherwise. And I have the friend with various disabilities. And, she's teaching me a ton because she is one of those unstoppable forces. Doesn't matter what life throws at her. She ducks, and then she just keeps fighting her way forward. And, that teaches me about perseverance in ways that I would not have been able to learn otherwise.
Right.
That's a great, sorry. Go ahead.
That's what's so important for people to be able to come to the conclusion, especially if they're older, I don't want to change, I'm set in my ways or whatever. But if you're especially in a business or wanting to advance what you do, you have to be open-minded to the different perspectives. And if that means that you have to make things more accessible to understand and take on those different perceptions to help your business, then that says a lot about who you are, and that you're open to those different perspectives.
Well, sure, I'm learning a lot, and having perspective on my own life has always been a little hard for me because I tend to over focus on the areas that I don't handle well and take for granted the areas that I do. And knowing a greater variety of people with a range of challenges has helped me learn to, at age 66, with Parkinson's and with arthritis and with, bone spurs and all these things, your springs tend to pop a little bit as time goes on. It's helped me be appreciative of where I am now. I can think, okay, in 20 years, I'm going to find myself saying, oh, if I could just be 66 again, man, I could do all these things.
Right.
So why not, when I'm 66, be celebrating and be thankful for all the things I can do now that I might not be able to do in 20 years. Who knows? So I'll fight for those freedoms and those privileges. But if I don't have them, I'll know that I appreciated them when I did. And I think that's really important.
Yeah. And
My
I think it's also really important that for the people in those classes, because if it's a mixed class, you get all those learning opportunities you wouldn't normally get. Like if we have this tendency in the disability community to silo ourselves, like, oh, you have Parkinson's, I have ataxia, we can't hang out, or CP or whatever. And but that's very limiting. We tend to only see things one way, and it's much harder to grow when we're all disconnected like that.
Yes. And
That's sorry, go ahead.
oh, well, it just brings to mind one person I know who was diagnosed with a condition that was hard for him to learn that he had. He was very athletic, and this condition tends to erode that part of who a person is. And so he had not divulged to people outside of his family that he had that. And recently he shared with me that he found out an old friend of his was struggling with some very serious health issues. And he was concerned about her because he thought, I think she feels alone in her struggle. And so even though he'd been diagnosed for a few years and he hadn't told anybody, he decided to share with her that she wasn't alone. She was struggling with her health situation. He was also struggling with his. And they really connected as two courageous people, each suffering from something that was daunting, but knowing that there was another courageous person out there who really cared for and about them, and who was willing to sacrifice the illusion of normalcy because he felt like it was more important to be authentic and courageous and upholding of somebody else in their suffering. And I was just so impressed that this person did that. It really was. Suffering should make us stronger and less shackled by pride, stronger in our willingness to connect with other people, to bless and encourage them. Because even people who do not have things that are considered disabilities, they have life, they have being human, and that's hard enough. And in some ways, we in the disability community may be able to help some of our friends who are not disabled learn how to gently release our 20-year-old selves so that we can enjoy all of the joys and strengths of being our older selves, with a few springs sticking out. But we all have that in common, and that's okay. It really is okay. It doesn't make us any less valuable.
it's sort of about like in our usually in as we're young adults, we have this picture of how everything's gonna work out. And I guess as we get older, we learn slowly to how to let go of that.
Because that would have been boring anyway.
Right.
Instead, we're
Yeah.
much more colorful and interesting people, leading much more interesting lives than we would have agreed
Yeah.
to if we'd been consulted.
Right.
I think we're better people for it. No kidding.
Oh, definitely.
Yeah.
Yeah. Anything else, Mark?
There were some other things you wanted to update us on. Isn't that right?
Yeah.
Let's see.
You had a list of things.
Oh, one thing that has been interesting for me is to discover that my functionality is somewhat dependent upon what time of day it is. I wake up every morning feeling like I have access to all my cognitive functions and that I can handle whatever I need to handle. And then I'm disabused of that notion by the end of the day. And
Yeah.
I am just like kind of a little bit pie-eyed. And in the beginning, that used to make me feel panicky, like, oh no, maybe I'm losing my mind. Well, if I am losing my mind, it's being restored every morning. So, it's not that big of a deal. But I have learned to try and situate my creative work so that it's during the time of the day when I'm in the best shape cognitively, because having a condition that requires some adjusting just means that life uses more energy for me than it would otherwise. And so I run out of energy earlier in the day than I used to. And if at the end of the day, I can just do the routine things like throw in another load of laundry and fold it and undo the dishes from the dishwasher, life goes better than if I'm trying to do some highly creative stuff. So I'm learning to basically time things like sailors do, with the tide. If you are in sync with when the tide is going out, it's easier to launch something. If the water's coming in and you're trying to get out, it's not going to go as well. So do I have that right or do I not? You can tell I'm not a sailor. Okay.
No, I think that sounds right.
Oh, well, okay. If it's not right, my apologies to all of the nautical people out there. Please set me straight. Yes.
So there's the disclaimer there.
There you go. And yeah, don't entrust me with your boat. And another thing that has happened is that I have discovered that when I get tired, I start to make no sense at all. I'll be in the middle of a conversation with somebody and I'll just start talking about butterflies and other things that don't really pertain to the conversation. And it sounds like I'm losing my mind. And I used to try and cover up that little signal. And now I just am open with people about it. And I say, oh my, I think I'm making no sense at all. Is that true? And the other person says, with some degree of relief, that is absolutely true. You are making no sense. And then I said, oh, that probably means it's time for me to get ready for bed. And, just being open about it, also not panic. And it just has become a useful reminder that I can be very functional until I'm out of energy for functioning. And then I have this peculiarity that goes off like an alarm and says, okay, don't try and be functional. Don't get behind the wheel of a car. And no kidding, that has been an issue for me a couple of times. I have not paid attention to my signals. And 2 times I have gone off the side of the road and needed to regroup. So I'm having to take that extremely seriously now. In both cases, there were no other cars that were involved or anything, and basically I just fell asleep for a moment behind the wheel of the car. And I can't afford for that to ever happen again. If I have to give up driving first, I'll give up driving first. I don't want to hurt anybody. But if
Yeah.
what goes on is that I start making no sense, then, I'm gonna do what I have to do to get to a safe place so that I don't
Right.
go off the road. So,
And it's incredibly important also for other people to respect
yes,
that you as a person recognize that, okay, after this time, I'm not okay and I'm not my best. It's important for other people to recognize that that's your experience and not to take advantage of that, because you're maybe not as strong as you are between the hours of, like, I don't know, 8 and 4, um, because like right now, I'm probably the best I can be, but come 4 o'clock, forget it.
right, exactly.
um, and it's, if that's a problem, then is it really safe or a good experience for you to have a good life if people are going to take advantage of what your disability is not after 4 o'clock?
You're absolutely right. I can no longer go to church meetings that are in the evenings. Now, there's a chance that I can get on a Zoom version of it, so I can participate by Zoom. But people have to be ready to watch me do this,
Yeah.
because when my body starts to shut down, I can't argue with it anymore. I used to be able to when I
Yeah.
was young, but now when it's time for my body to shut down, it's going to shut down, whether I'm behind a wheel or in the middle of a church meeting or in the middle of a podcast or in the middle of teaching a class. And so if I want to avoid it doing harm to others, I need to be extremely honest with myself about my limitations, because I do not want to hurt anybody else, because I run out of steam before I run out of options.
Right.
Is that right?
It also
Yeah.
matters where you are in life and the different things that are going on around you.
Yes.
A year ago, I would not have been okay with us doing this on a Saturday.
Mhm.
I just, I didn't have those, metaphorical spoons,
Right.
to deal with extra stuff on Saturday, work stuff,
Right.
that was the day I needed to relax and clean, um, or do laundry, whatever,
Right.
I could have spoons to do,
Exactly.
and also I like to use the metaphorical, not spoons, but
Right.
a toolbox. Talk about having a metaphorical toolbox,
Yes.
where you place all your tools in a specific place, and it's inside that open
Mhm.
canvas, and throughout the day you require all of those tools, the function, and of course you customize your toolbox, but for all of us with a disability, and even not with a disability, that toolbox can be very, throughout the day can those tools vanish. The ability to use those tools vanish.
Right.
Uh,
Like the tools have been taken out and then not repacked in the toolbox.
until
So
the
you have
next
less to work
morning.
with. Yeah, but then by the next morning, they get repacked
Mhm.
and you're starting
Yeah.
fresh.
Mhm.
But it can be very discouraging when it's the end of the day and you're trying to do something you could have done at the beginning of the day,
Yeah.
but it becomes pretty impossible.
Yep.
Yeah, I understand. And the toolbox idea brings to mind something else that has been helpful for me. It is the whole idea of therapy. You know, there's a part of me that still hears the voice of my father saying, just pull yourself together. Well, now I realize that at the beginning of our lives, we have family that is strong in certain ways and has certain tools that they know all about and use for everything. And we start out okay, most of us. And then life happens and we're in new situations. And not everything is best done with a screwdriver. Like if suddenly you're trying to put up a wall of portraits. Yeah, you can bang the nails in with a screwdriver handle, but how much better it is to learn about hammers. How cool is that? And that's where therapy comes in. Basically, I think a lot of us have very incomplete toolboxes. And it's not that our families haven't done right by us. It's just that they've done incompletely by us because
Differently.
they have it all.
Yeah. Mhm.
Yeah.
And so if we get therapy, then we can add new tools to our toolboxes. Things that we thought were impossible become very possible. And we can also share those tools with other people who need them. How cool is that?
Yeah, that is very cool. It's also coming to the realization that the tools that your parents gave you, right,
Yeah.
functioned well for them, but they're only giving it to you because it's all they've been given through their knowledge and experience, and it's been passed down from their parents, and it worked for them, so they're passing it on to you. That doesn't necessarily mean that it's what you need to use.
Right.
And this is a totally different time period.
Yes.
Disability is a lot more prevalent. And of course, being disabled, you have to be adaptable and figure out different tools to use to function, to be as successful. Maybe you do it differently and not using the tools that you were given or grew up with, whatever. It's not just respecting them, because I respect I got those tools. But it also needs to be respected that I have had to adapt my toolbox to fit my needs.
Yes.
And that's nothing, saying nothing bad about them.
Right.
It's just I did what I needed to do.
It's like they may have supplied a wonderful set of stuff for putting new horseshoes on your horse. But if you're not riding a horse to get from one place to another, but you're driving a car, you need things for repairing cars. And even if you have great horseshoeing materials, they're not going to help with the car.
Right.
And people of a certain generation are very much about just never mind what you're going through, just get on with it, just forget it and get on with it. And that's a great attitude to have to a certain point, but then causes you to dismiss your own situation. And I mean, eventually, if you're sensitive enough, you get to a life where you're just as broken down golf cart because you don't know how to do anything,
Right.
because you're stuck with the situation that advice is not applicable to,
Yes, and when somebody treats it as if you were being disloyal to them, when you are not consulting, their advice, even though it is not a fit for your situation, that can be painful.
Yeah.
Sometimes I explain the energy shift for people with a disability as being a little bit like being used to driving a car with a big gas tank and then discovering actually you've been issued a golf cart. And it has a nice little gas tank, but it's not the same size that you're used to. And so you're going to have to refill it more frequently. And by the way, Crystal, Doug has said to me very recently, and he doesn't have a disability, he says, I'm just going to have to accept the fact that Saturdays I have no energy for doing anything. I used to, not anymore. So that's just part of being 66 for him.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Well, yeah, and that's the other thing about this, what we talk about sometimes, it's not only about disability, but it's about learning to have to make changes because of your age,
Right.
becoming disabled or not having the ability you once did,
That's exactly it. Yeah. It's adapting to life as it changes around you and inside of you. And we do all have that in common. And in some ways, I think we in the disability community have an advantage over people who don't have a disability, because we have to learn earlier on that change is inevitable, that adapting is useful, and that if you're willing to adapt, you can do a surprising amount for a surprisingly long period of time. It's just it's like the stiff-necked people of the Bible. We all tend to be stiff-necked people and want to do it the way we learned how to do it and not make any changes and all of that. But if we can let go of being stiff-necked and instead be trustful that we can handle change, we can adapt, we can be okay in a world that doesn't stay stable forever, then we can handle life better than, frankly, people who haven't learned that lesson yet.
And it's a lot about realizing that we don't have as much control as we thought we did.
Exactly. Which is the case for all of us. Yep. You're right about that. My mother died at 96, and I think her last year of life was spent learning the lesson that she did not, in fact, have control over every aspect of life, no matter how hard she tried and how smart she was and all of that. But that just basically gave her something in common with the whole human race. Probably a good thing we don't have as much control as we would like, but it's such a treasure to be able to talk with you guys. It really is.
No, we always have really good, insightful conversations.
Well, I always learn a ton.
And it's always good to talk to you personally as well. Just, it doesn't always have to be philosophical.
Right.
But I mean, we're just, it always flows like that though.
Yeah.
Like we we have some of the same thoughts and ideas about life, you know?
Exactly. And it's a joyful thing for me to hear you all expressing things that I believe true too, you know? It's like, oh, kindred spirits, yay.
Yeah, yeah, that's always so important to me, to connect with people and know without saying anything. You know, you want to verbalize that appreciation that they're there, but them knowing and being supportive of you because they know that you both have, you all have the same like-minded things at the path, that you just know that they're doing what you're doing it through and for a good purpose.
Right,
You know?
right.
Mhm.
Yeah, that's pretty cool.
Yeah,
Speaking of
it's
which, I'm going to look up more Labyrinth stuff for you because it's awesome.
Yeah,
I see a few
emails that,
and stuff. Yeah,
emails that.
yeah,
it's also another great blessing of being in the condition that we're in, disabled, that it brought us all together. You know, if not for that, we may have not known about each other.
Right,
yeah.
right. Mm.
That's pretty.
Yeah. Yeah, it's always interesting, you know, Mark, you had mentioned a little while ago how some disabilities kind of silo themselves, but on another level, when you connect with people, just people, not even because of a disability, you know, you connect with them and it doesn't matter their disability, you know.
Yeah, it's really true. I
Mhm.
remember going to a women's retreat one time when I was a newlywed, and there was a woman at the retreat who had irregular features. I don't know what had happened to her. It was probably like a prenatal thing, but you know, her eyes were not even, and she was a little bit like a Picasso type of, you know, portrait. And when I first met her, I wasn't sure exactly how to look into her eyes. But by the end of the weekend, I gotten to know her as a person. She was incredible. She really ended up kind of mentoring me. And I remember by the end of that weekend thinking, okay, definitely the most beautiful woman in this entire crowd is right over there. It was so cool. I've never forgotten her. And she really was just beautiful. You know, she was one of those radiant people. She just shone with light. It was so awesome. So anyway, you know, people teach you along the way if you let them.
Just have to listen and be perceptive of other people's experiences, or you're disadvantaging yourself, you know. That's part of the human experience that so many people have shielded and not want to take a notice of.
You're right. And I find sometimes it's the physically symmetrical people who, you know, who adhere to the world standards for beauty, who suffer the most. I mean, they really do, because they have such a tiny space to occupy and feel safe in, you know, whereas we can sort of sprawl all over the place and know that we're still us, and that's good, you know. But when it's someone who's stunningly beautiful and something happens, and something always happens because life happens, you know, then they can find themselves feeling like they've lost their value. And how sad is that? Their value was never in the external stuff. And yet they've never learned that the internal stuff is where the beauty lies.
Yeah.
So we're all disabled in some way. Sometimes we're disabled by being stunningly beautiful. That's not my problem.
Not mine either.
We are internally magnificent.
Mhm,
Actually,
for
that's
sure.
true.
Mhm,
We're pretty awesome.
yeah.
Yep.
Well, thank you, and it has been such an insightful conversation, and we have enjoyed. I mean, at the time that you had the interview, I was just, watching it and on the sidelines, So it is definitely from that, watching that to now, it has definitely been a journey, watching how you've turned that into growth, and not just for yourself, but other people as well. So
Thank you.
it's always so awesome to watch our guests and what they're doing now and how they're using those. So thank you for joining us and updating us on your journey.
Well, thank
Yeah,
you.
thank
And
you, Ann.
it's been a joy sharing journeys with one another, because the two of you have just been doing amazing things. And I think it's a good challenge for the rest of us to see what happens when you pair up with somebody who, has a slightly different set of strengths, and you're willing to learn from and with one another. You all have just continued to inspire me and also delight me. I'm glad you're in the world, and I'm glad you're doing what you're doing. And I'm glad to be facing a changing world and a changing body and a changing brain with people like you as part of learning how to deal with that, because you really are making a difference. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We just hope that we can deal with a lot more of those situations and going forward.
And we are all stronger together. We really are.
Yeah.
Thank you all.
Thank you so much. Bye.
Bye-bye.